She came home late that night, like every other night, exhausted, underpaid in love, and running on empty. But the moment she stepped out of her car in that underground garage, everything changed. The sound was faint at first, muffled. She almost convinced herself she imagined it. She didn't. 3 parking spots behind her car sat her husband's black Porsche Macan, and inside it, a truth that would have broken most women on the spot. But Amelia Hayes wasn't most women. She didn't throw open that car door. She didn't dial his number with shaking hands. She stood there in the silence, in the dark, and made a decision so cold, so deliberate, it would take months to fully execute. By the time Alex realized what was happening, it was already over. His company, his money, his reputation, gone. And the most terrifying part? She never raised her voice, not once. Here's what this story teaches us. A woman who builds herself on her own foundation cannot be destroyed, only underestimated. And that underestimation will always be the enemy's greatest mistake. If you believe in the power of quiet strength, give this video a like and share it with someone who needs this reminder right now. Subscribe to our channel, because we tell the stories that matter every single week. This content was carefully researched, built, and manually edited by our team, with the purpose of bringing you meaning, reflection, and real lessons from life.
It all started with a phone call in the dead of night. Not the one you dread about an accident, but something colder, stranger. It was my son, Alex, his voice thin and shaky. He told me Amelia had locked him in his Porsche with some young woman from his office, turning the heat all the way up. My first thought, God forgive me, was that she'd finally lost her mind. The next morning, I was at their front door by 10, pounding on it like a woman possessed. When Amelia answered, she just had this placid little smile. I'd always known she worked too hard, staying at the office until 11:30 at night, finishing some report. I thought her ambition had curdled something inside her, and my boy was paying the price. She used to talk about how quiet her office was, just her and the city lights bleeding through the fog. I remember thinking it sounded so terribly lonely. She spent 7 nights in a row there once for some big merger. I told Alex, a wife belongs at home, not in a boardroom after dark. I see now I was a fool. Their whole world seemed wound so tight, like a watch spring ready to snap. Amelia Hayes, my daughter-in-law, 32, a marketing executive. To me, she was the image of modern success, the woman in the expensive shoes who had forgotten the simple things. I was so wrong. They had it all, you see. The big salary, the beautiful co-op on the Upper East Side, the safe, sensible car for her and the flashy one for him. My son, Alex Vance, a partner at his firm, so handsome, so charming. They had little Ethan. On the surface, they were the family you see in magazines, the kind that makes you feel a little inadequate. A storybook marriage, I used to call it. I was the one who saw the cracks and papered them over. I noticed how the easy conversations they had in college had dwindled to logistics about their son's school or the household chores. I told myself it was normal, that the first spark always fades. I saw that the affection had become a habit, a gesture he made without thinking. An invisible wall stood between them. They could see each other, but they couldn't touch. I blamed her career. It was easier than blaming my son. She told me once how Ethan would FaceTime her late at night, his little face a mixture of sleep and longing, asking when Mommy was coming home. She said it broke her heart. I remember feeling a pang of sympathy, but it was quickly followed by judgment. A mother's place is with her child. Just one more tiny thing, baby, she'd tell him before hanging up. Then she'd walk through that silent, empty office building, her shadow long and lonely on the polished floors. She was chasing a future for her family, and all I could see was a woman leaving them behind. She told me the only time she felt like herself was in the car, driving home. The moment the engine was on, the mask of the high-powered executive could come off. She'd listen to classical music, letting it untangle the knots in her mind from a week of stress. The drive through the drizzling city was her only peace. She'd watch the wipers pushing away the rain and wish they could push away her worries, too. She'd think of Ethan's smile, and then of Alex's face, a face she once loved that had started to look like a stranger's. When was the last time they'd truly been together? When had they last held each other with meaning? She couldn't remember. She confessed to me once, in a moment of vulnerability I dismissed, that she felt this profound emptiness. She had everything, and yet she had nothing. She was, in her own words, a ghost in her own perfect life. I listened, but I didn't hear. When her car would slip into their building's garage, she felt like the darkness was swallowing her. I should have seen she was crying for help. Her parking spot was in a secluded corner. The night it all shattered, she had just turned off the engine when she heard a noise cutting through the quiet. At first she thought she was imagining it, but the sound continued, a desperate, heavy breathing, a woman's sharp moans and a man's rough panting. It was coming from a car just a few spots away. Her first reaction wasn't anger, but disgust. The sound was so crude, so shameless. To be doing that in a public space where anyone could hear. My heart aches for her, remembering that. The coil of ice that must have wrapped around her heart. She looked around the dim, cavernous garage. The cars were like sleeping animals in the shadows. The sickly green emergency lights made everything feel tight and suffocating, and the sound was coming from somewhere terribly, terribly close. Then, the realization hit her like a physical blow. The sounds were coming from Alex's car, his black Porsche, the gift he bought himself when he made partner, the symbol of his success, my son's symbol of betrayal. He told her he had a client dinner, that he'd be home late. He told me the same thing. And a name rose in her mind, a name I myself had heard Alex mention with a little too much enthusiasm, his junior colleague, Chloe Miller. She was a young designer at his firm, pretty, bright, the kind of girl who makes older women feel invisible. Alex had brought her to family events, puffing up his chest as he introduced his talented protégé. Amelia had seen them once, their heads close together over some blueprints. She saw the worship in that girl's eyes, and she saw the look on my son's face, a look of arrogant satisfaction I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. Amelia, bless her heart, had brushed it off as professional pride. But standing there in that cold garage, the memory became damning. Her hands grew damp, her knuckles white. A voice screamed at her to leave, to go upstairs and pretend, to preserve the beautiful lie for the sake of their son, for all of us. But she couldn't. She was rooted to the spot. She got out of her car, the soft click of her heels on the concrete echoing like a verdict. She had to see the truth she already knew in her bones. She crept toward my son's car, each step an agony. The sounds grew clearer, more vulgar. Her moans, a theatrical performance. His grunts, a sound of brutish ownership. There, in his precious car, parked in the spot they shared, they were putting on this sordid, pathetic show. And a clean, cold rage, unlike anything she'd ever felt before, ignited inside of her. It wasn't just that he cheated. It was that he had made their life, their story, into something so cheap. So, all their history, the late nights studying, the cheap ramen in their first apartment, the promises they made, it all turned to shards of glass inside her. She hid behind a concrete pillar, concealed by the shadows. It was his car, rocking with a steady, sickening rhythm. The windows were tinted, but the sounds leaking out confirmed everything. And in that moment, as she stared, all her pain and confusion burned away, leaving only a single, hard point of fury. The passenger door was ajar. A woman's leg in a black stocking was hanging out, a stiletto abandoned on the grimy floor. Chloe. It was Chloe, and it was my Alex. My boy. Amelia felt like her chest was splitting open. She wanted to scream, to pound on the window, to drag them out and expose them. But a colder, more terrifying voice took over. Hysterics would make her the victim in their cheap drama. A messy divorce, lawyers, custody battles, shame for our families. No, she didn't want a moment of satisfaction. She wanted victory. She wanted a revenge so absolute they would never recover. The word took root in her heart, she said. They had burned her world to the ground. And now I understand. I understand why she decided to make them pay for every single ash. I must have drifted off. The late-night talk show host was laughing at something on the screen, but all I could think about was the quiet in this apartment. A home this big shouldn't feel so empty. I looked at the Porsche key sitting on the side table, a spare Alex insisted I keep. He was so proud of that car. Too proud, maybe. I sighed, a familiar worry tightening my chest. He loves things more than people sometimes, I murmured to the empty room. That wasn't fair, but the thought was there. I picked up a magazine trying to distract myself, but my mind kept wandering back to them. To Alex, my brilliant, handsome son, and to Amelia, the quiet, steady woman who seemed to be drifting further away from him every day. My hand rested on the cool leather of my purse. I stared toward the front door, half willing it to open. It's a mother's curse, I suppose, this constant low-level anxiety. I knew their marriage had been strained. Alex worked so hard, and Amelia had grown colder lately. I tried to tell myself it was just a phase, the kind of rough patch every couple hits, but a part of me knew this felt different. I thought back to when they first met. The way Alex looked at her, like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. He bought her that expensive security system for her car back then, a grand gesture to show how much he cared about her safety, a remote system that could lock everything down tight. He'd shown me how it worked once. I never imagined it being anything more than a rich man's toy. My finger traced the stitching on my old leather handbag. What if this was more than a rough patch? The silence in the apartment felt heavy, accusatory. On a chilly night like this, you want your family home, safe and sound, not out somewhere, growing further apart. The thought of them being in any kind of danger, even emotional danger, made my heart ache. They were supposed to be happy. They had everything: a beautiful home, a wonderful son, a life people dreamed of. The thought of it all falling apart was terrifying. It would shatter my Alex. He put so much of himself into building this perfect life, this perfect image. And Amelia, she was a good mother to Ethan. I could never deny that. But she had a hardness to her sometimes, a wall I could never quite get past. I closed my eyes, telling myself to stop borrowing trouble. They were fine. They were just out having a late dinner. I pushed the worry down, a familiar exercise in maternal denial. I must have dozed off again because the click of the front door made my heart leap into my throat. But it was just Amelia, alone. I sat up, smoothing my hair, trying to arrange my face into a casual smile. She looked composed, too composed, like a porcelain doll. Her face was a perfect, unreadable mask, but there was something in her eyes, a strange, cold light that I had never seen before. It unsettled me deep in my bones. It wasn't the look of a tired wife coming home from work, or even an angry one. It was the look of a stranger. Everyone carries a hidden self, I suppose, a person you keep locked away. Looking at her then, I felt like I was seeing that hidden person for the first time, and it frightened me. Then the living room light caught her face, and she was just Amelia again. She saw me on the sofa, dozing in front of the blaring television. A small smile touched her lips, but it didn't reach that coldness in her eyes. "Oh, you're home," I said, my voice a little thick with sleep. "Ethan's been asleep for hours. Working late again?" "Had to, Margaret, a last-minute crisis," she answered, her voice like glass as she slipped off her shoes. "You can't burn yourself out," I said, pushing myself up from the couch. My eyes scanned the doorway behind her. "Is Alex not back with you?" Her gaze met mine, and for a second, I saw that flicker of ice again. His dinner must be running late. I didn't check. She said it so evenly, but the words felt like a slammed door. I just hummed, studying her face. Something was terribly wrong. I felt it in my gut, the way a mother does. "It's getting so late," I mumbled, moving toward my room, but my mind was racing. I watched her walk to Ethan's bedroom. She was a good mother, I knew that. I closed my door, but I didn't get into bed. I just sat there listening to the silence, my unease growing into a real, palpable fear. Tears pricked my eyes, but they were tears of confusion and a terrible, rising dread. My poor, beautiful boy, my Alex. Where was he? Why did Amelia seem so unconcerned? Our family, which I thought was a fortress, suddenly felt like it was made of glass, about to shatter, and I had a sickening feeling that she was holding the hammer. I pulled out my phone, my hands trembling slightly, and dialed Alex's number. It rang, and then went to voicemail. I tried again. Voicemail. A knot of pure ice formed in my stomach. Something was wrong. Something was happening. I felt trapped, helpless, listening to the hum of the refrigerator in the quiet apartment. I must have sat there for an hour, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Then my phone finally rang, and his name flashed on the screen. Relief washed over me, so potent it made me dizzy. But when I answered, it wasn't relief I heard. It was pure, raw terror, and it was a sound I will never forget. No, it wasn't his voice at first. It was a desperate, panicked gasping. Then he choked out the words, "Mom! Mom, help me!" His voice was thin and ragged. "What is it, Alex? What's wrong?" I was on my feet, pacing my small room. "The car, I can't get out. Amelia, she did this." I flew out of my room and began hammering on her locked bedroom door. Amelia, you get out here this instant. You witch, what in God's name did you do to my son?" I threw myself against the solid wood, my fists aching, my voice raw. All I could hear was my son's ragged breathing on the phone, a sound that was tearing my world apart. A cold, wicked smile is what I imagined on her face. The real show, for her, was just beginning. "Amelia, open this door, you vicious woman. Tell me what you did to Alex. Open this door right now." My screams echoed in the hallway, mixing with the relentless pounding of my fists. All the years of polite smiles and strained dinners vanished. I wasn't a mother-in-law anymore. I was a mother, a lioness fighting for her cub, pouring every ounce of my terror and rage into that unmoving door. I stood there panting, listening to the monstrous silence from the other side. My breathing was ragged, my heart a wild drum in my ears. In the dim hallway light, I must have looked like a madwoman, and I didn't care. I pounded again, yelling his name, her name, until my throat was raw. My mind flashed to a picture on the mantelpiece. Alex, Amelia, and Ethan, all of them smiling in the sun, a perfect family. The lie of it, the bitter irony, was a physical pain in my chest. I had believed in that picture. I had defended it. And now it was burning down around me. I remember pounding on that garage door until my knuckles were bruised and raw, my voice tearing with every word I screamed. "You monster, Amelia! You let my son out of there! If anything happens to him, I swear I will make you pay!" I was a mother lion, blind with a fierce, protective rage. The insults I hurled were born of pure, ignorant terror, and I see now that my furious defense of him must have been music to her ears. "Do you hear me, Alex?" I'd sobbed against the door. "Your mother is here." I was convinced he was the victim, that he was perfect. I had no idea that the golden boy I raised was inside that car, facing the awful price of his own secret life. I was still screaming when we all heard the explosion, a sound so final it seemed to suck all the air from the world. The frame shuddered, groaning under the impact. A 60-year-old woman finding a strength I never knew I possessed. It didn't give. A moment later, I was fumbling for my phone again, my fingers shaking as I called building security. "Hello, is this building management? You need to send someone up here right now. My son is trapped in the garage. He's locked in, please. You have to hurry." I shrieked into the phone, my voice tearing through the night. I didn't feel a thing but a cold, spreading dread. I looked at the spare Porsche key on the hall table. It was just a piece of plastic and metal, but suddenly it felt like a weapon she had somehow turned against my son. a small, enclosed space. That's all he could get out before the line went dead. It was getting hot, he'd said. At first, I couldn't make sense of it. But now, a horrifying picture was starting to form in my mind. 2 people, trapped, with the heat climbing. It wouldn't be a warning. It would be a slow, agonizing torture. I could almost see it. Alex, my strong, confident son, reduced to panic. And he wasn't alone. He'd said something about a girl, Chloe. At that moment, it didn't even register. All that mattered was my son, my boy, trapped in a metal box that was slowly, deliberately becoming a tomb. I took a stumbling step into the living room, my eyes landing on the vast, dark window overlooking the city. The rain had stopped, but the sky was a heavy, starless black. Our beautiful life, this dazzling penthouse view, it was all a lie. A beautiful, rotting lie. Then I heard a faint buzz. It was coming from her bedroom. The sound vibrated through the floorboards. A phone call. For a single, insane second, I thought maybe it was all a mistake. Then the buzzing stopped, and the silence that followed was the most terrifying thing I had ever heard. Ice cold. He was calling her. Right now. A moment later, I heard the faint, muffled murmur of her voice through the door. So quiet, so calm. All the charm and life was gone from my son's voice on the phone earlier. It had been replaced by a ragged, desperate rasp. "Hello, hello," I'd heard him say, his voice cracking with fear. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my very soul, that she was just sitting in there, listening. It started with a phone call, of course, a frantic, garbled mess from Alex. I could barely make out his words over the sound of his own ragged breathing and some girl whining in the background. "Mom, it's so hot," he gasped. "I can't breathe." My heart seized. "Just hold on, Alex, honey, what is it?" I asked. But all I got back was a strained, hollow reassurance meant for the girl, not for me. A mother knows. You know when your child is just upset, and you know when they are truly terrified. This was terror. His voice was pleading with no one. Then another voice cut through the line, a woman's, and it was as cold and calm as a winter morning. "Having a good time, Alex?" The line went utterly, terrifyingly silent. Even the girls crying stopped. I pictured my son, my handsome, successful boy, frozen somewhere in the dark. I could almost feel the confusion, then the slow, creeping dread as he recognized that voice. It took him a moment to speak, a moment that felt like an eternity to me. "Amelia? What did you do to my car?" he finally managed, his voice a low growl of disbelief. His car. That was his first thought. A small, chilling laugh echoed through the phone. It was Amelia. "You seem confused, Alex," she said. "That car is yours. You bought it with your money." "It was never ours," she continued, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "As for what I did, I just turned your little toy into a convection oven. It must be 95 degrees in there by now. How much longer do you think you two can last?" My son's voice was ragged with fury. "You're insane, Amelia." "You're crazy," Alex sputtered, his composure gone. "Open this door. Are you trying to kill us?" And Amelia, oh, that poor girl's voice was light, almost amused. "Kill you? No, Alex. You and that little intern killed our family. I'm just helping you sweat out the guilt." "Think of it as cardio," she went on. "You must be burning so many calories." Then the other one, the girl in the car, started sobbing hysterically. "Alex, I can't. It's too hot. I want out." "Shut up, Chloe," Alex snapped before yelling into the phone. "Amelia, what do you want? I'll give you anything. Just make it stop." And there it was, my son. Always the negotiator, always trying to buy his way out of consequences. Never remorse, just a transaction. It was a trait I'd once admired as ambition. Now it made my stomach turn. I learned later what was said between them. He offered her money. Money. as if a check could somehow plaster over 7 years of a life, a marriage, my beautiful grandson, Ethan. The shame of it still burns me. I can almost hear her voice, cold and empty. Money? You think this is about money, Alex? Do you really think so little of what you've thrown away? Then what do you want, you psycho? He had apparently screamed back. And her answer chills me to this day. Justice, she'd said, her voice like ice. You always loved to be in control, to play your little games. Well, now you get to feel what it's like to lose. You wanted your fun in that car, so by all means, enjoy it. I have all night, she said. If you two are still alive by morning, we can talk. And then she hung up, just like that. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. My boy was trapped, and his wife had put him there. I sat there stunned for what felt like an hour. My first instinct was to call the police, but the thought of the scandal, a Henderson in the papers for something like this, I couldn't. My hand shook as I found the number for building management instead. This was just step one. I had to get him out. The game, I realized with a shudder, was just beginning. The phone barely rang once before a man answered. Mr. Henderson, this is Margaret Vance. My son, Alex, he's trapped in his car in the garage. There's something wrong with the locks. He can't breathe. Please, you have to help. It was the smart play. No police, no public record, just a quiet internal problem to be solved. I was being a clever snake, protecting the family name, just as I'd always done. What a fool I was. Mr. Henderson, hello, a voice said on the other end, but it wasn't him. It was Amelia. She'd gotten to him first. She was playing panicked, breathless. Is it my husband's car? In Section B? I'll be right there. She was putting on a show for them. Yes, Miss Hayes, please hurry. Our security is on their way. Please, just come as fast as you can. I hung up the phone, my own panic turning to a cold, hard knot of suspicion. I threw on my coat, not even bothering with a mirror, and ran for the door, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. As I pulled my own door open, I almost ran right into her. Amelia, dressed in a trench coat, her hair a mess, her eyes red-rimmed, a perfect portrait of a distraught wife. Years of sitting in boardrooms had taught me how to spot a performance, and this was a masterpiece. For a moment, blind rage took over. You, I hissed, my finger trembling as I pointed at her. If anything happens to my son. But she met my fury with a flood of tears, her voice breaking. Margaret, I just got the call. What happened? We have to get down there. Her act was flawless. It was so good it made me doubt myself. She guided me, the grieving mother-in-law, toward the elevator as we met the manager and security. All the way down, I was the one praying out loud. Oh God, Alex, please be okay. My fear was real, a raw, screaming thing in my chest. Beside me, Amelia was a pillar of counterfeit panic. When the elevator doors opened on Section B, the sight of that black Porsche under the fluorescent lights stole the air from my lungs. It looked like a tomb. That's the car, I cried out, stumbling forward. The manager had to catch my arm, but I kept my eyes on Amelia. She hung back, watching. Her heart wasn't racing. Her eyes weren't filled with fear. They were cold. She didn't have to get closer. I knew, somehow, that she was in complete control. I looked at that car and understood. The heat shimmering off the roof wasn't an accident. It wasn't a malfunction. It was a punishment. And my son, and the girl he was with, were growing weaker by the second. One of the young guards finally knocked on the driver's side window. Sir, ma'am, can you hear me? He got no answer. He tried the other side, his banging echoing in the silent garage. The color drained from his face as he turned to us. There's no response. Those 3 words broke me. My knees gave out and I nearly collapsed right there on the dirty concrete. It's over, I whispered. My Alex. Amelia was there in an instant, catching me, her voice thick with fake tears. Margaret, don't say that. The spare key isn't working, the manager said, wringing his hands. The anti-theft is military grade. I grabbed his arm, my nails digging into his sleeve. "Then do something," I shrieked. "Call someone now." "Ma'am, for a lock like this? At this hour? We'd have to cut the door off," he said, his face grim. The men started shouting useless ideas, their panic filling the space. They were chickens with their heads cut off. And through it all, Amelia stood perfectly still, a calm island in a sea of chaos. She was watching us, watching me. I realized then that she wasn't just the architect of this nightmare, she was its audience. Our helplessness was part of the show. I looked at her face, then at the frantic manager, and a terrible sadness settled over me. This was the family I had protected, the son I had enabled. And in a true crisis, we shattered into a million terrified pieces, pointing fingers at the shadows. They hadn't pointed them at her yet. She took a shuddering breath, her performance continuing. "Wait," she said, her voice cracking beautifully. "Alex mentioned an emergency release in the trunk to open the doors from inside." Hope, sharp and painful, pierced through my despair. The guards scrambled to the back of the car, prying the trunk open. They tore away the lining and found a small red handle. One of them gave it a hard yank. Nothing. The click of unlocking doors never came. The silence stretched. I watched the security guards fumbling, frantic, muttering about how nothing would work. "It's all locked down," one of them shouted. I realized now that she had built that prison herself, with technical precision. She had overridden every system, every emergency handle, every possible escape route. She had sealed them in as surely as if she'd bricked up the door. "Piece of junk!" a guard yelled, kicking the tire. That was all it took. The last thread of my composure snapped. I fell to my knees, pounding the filthy floor. "Alex, wake up!" And then my head shot up and my eyes found hers. The truth was there, in her calm, cold gaze. "You!" I screamed, my voice raw. "You did this. It's all your fault, you bitch. You wanted this." All I saw was her. Amelia stood there, still as a statue, while the world fell apart around us. The security guards, the garage manager. I could feel their eyes on her, on me, their suspicion a thick, suffocating blanket. In these situations, I know how it looks. The wife is always the first person they suspect. My own screams felt distant, as if they belonged to another woman. I let them stare at her, this cold, quiet girl who was destroying my son. What could I say that would make them understand? Nothing mattered except getting my Alex out of that car. Every second that ticked by was an eternity of him suffering in there. I couldn't stop picturing it. The heat climbing, the air thinning. My boy, my beautiful boy, trapped inside that metal box, slowly, horribly being baked alive. My mind was a gallery of horrors I couldn't escape. I imagined his panic, his desperation as he clawed at windows that wouldn't break, screaming for a rescue that wasn't coming. How could this be happening? And she just stood there, watching. It was like she was a puppeteer, and my son's life was dangling from her invisible strings. I looked at the clock on the wall, my vision blurred with tears. 1:30 in the morning. A whole hour had passed. A whole hour my son had been in that oven. The sound of my own sobbing was the only thing that felt real. A funeral lament for the boy I raised, the man I adored. How could this be his end? The manager and his guards just hovered uselessly, wiping sweat from their faces while my son was dying. Every so often their gaze would flick from the car to Amelia, this quiet woman at the center of my nightmare. I could see the confusion in their eyes, the fear. They were looking at a monster and didn't even know the depths of her cruelty. I watched her pull out her phone, her thumb moving over the screen. Her calmness was inhuman. Then I heard an officer nearby repeat a number into his radio, a number that stopped my heart. 105 degrees, the temperature inside the car. A wave of nausea washed over me. They were in critical danger. My son's body was shutting down. I'm a nurse. I know what that kind of heat does. I pictured it in textbook detail. his core temperature rising, his organs beginning to fail. It's a kind of death you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. But I was beginning to realize she didn't want him dead. Death would be a mercy. This was something else entirely. This wasn't murder. This was torture. She was trying to break him, to demolish every part of him, to teach him a lesson so cruel it would scar him forever. And just as that awful thought solidified, I heard them. The distant, beautiful wail of sirens growing closer, promising salvation. The sound cut through my despair like a surgeon's scalpel. A pair of police cars, their lights painting the concrete walls in flashing red and blue, screeched to a stop. Doors flew open and officers emerged, their faces grim and determined as they marched toward us. One of them, older and clearly in charge, took command. His eyes swept over the scene, landing on the Porsche, then on me. "Who is the owner of this vehicle? What is going on here?" His voice was a loud, sharp crack of authority. "Officer, it's my son. He's trapped in there." I scrambled toward him, clinging to him like a drowning woman to a raft. "His name is Alex Vance. He's inside, and he can't get out. Please, you have to help him." The officer gave a sharp nod. We received a call about a trapped individual, black Porsche Macan. He confirmed, turning to the manager for the license plate. "Secure this area. Keep everyone who isn't essential back," the officer commanded. Younger policemen started unspooling yellow tape, pushing us all away from the car. I watched the lead officer walk up to the Porsche, his flashlight beam cutting through the tinted glass, before he turned back to his team. "Officer Miller, bring the window punch. We're going in." Seeing them finally taking action gave me a surge of furious energy. I grabbed Amelia's arm, my nails digging into her flesh. "Officer," I shrieked. "It was her, Amelia Hayes. She did this. She hates my son. I heard her on the phone with him today. She was threatening him." I was desperate, throwing anything I could to make them see the truth, but she just started crying, playing the part of the terrified wife. "No," she sobbed, shaking her head. "Officer, that's not true. I didn't do a thing. I didn't even know anything was wrong until they called me." The performance was sickeningly perfect. It made the officer pause, his sharp eyes flicking between the two of us, weighing my frantic accusations against her tearful denial. Just then, Officer Miller returned, holding a heavy steel tool. He aimed, swung, and the driver's side window exploded inward with a sound like a gunshot. For a heartbeat, I felt a wave of relief. But the door didn't open. The door didn't even budge. It was sealed tight, as if the shattered window meant nothing at all. "What on earth?" the lead officer muttered. Another cop reached his arm through the broken glass, trying to find the manual lock. After a few seconds of fumbling, he pulled back, shaking his head. "Sir, all the controls are dead. Nothing inside is working. The whole system is offline. It feels like it's being controlled by a remote." "Remotely," the officer repeated, and the word hung there in the hot, still air. He turned his head slowly, and his gaze landed right on Amelia. "Miss Hayes, you're his wife. Does this car have any special remote features?" My breath caught in my throat. He sees it. But she was ready, her voice trembling perfectly. "Officer, I honestly don't know the first thing about cars. This is Alex's car. He handles everything. He did mention something a few days ago, an anti-theft app he put on his phone. I remember that conversation. He was so proud of it, and she'd teased him for being paranoid." "Could it be that?" she asked, her voice small. "Could the app have malfunctioned?" The lie was so simple, so plausible. It explained the remote control but painted it as a tragic accident, my son's own fault. She was building her escape, brick by brick. It was enough to create doubt. The sergeant, a man named Davis, studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. He didn't ask her anything else, just keyed his radio. "Dispatch, Sergeant Davis here. We have a confirmed entrapment in a Porsche Macan at the B-level garage. The doors are sealed due to an unknown electrical failure. Standard entry methods have failed. I'm requesting a technical crew and a network specialist to our location. Repeat, tech and network support. He turned to us. All right, please remain calm. We have auto engineers on the way. For the next half hour, it was chaos. They tried crowbars, they brought out hydraulic tools that firefighters use, but nothing could pry that door open. My son's prized car, his fortress of German steel, had become his tomb. Every metallic clang of their failed attempts sent me further into a spiral of helpless panic. And through it all, Amelia just stood back, watching. She wasn't a victim. She was a spectator at her own sold-out show. The police weren't her accusers. They were her alibi. And for the first time, a cold, sharp question cut through my grief. Why? Why would she hate him this much? They were throwing every resource the city had at this car, and their very effort was part of her plan. The longer they took, the worse it got for my Alex and for the other woman, Chloe. The thought of her in there with him was a complicated, painful knot. This was a punishment, and it was becoming more terrible by the minute. Right then, as the tension in the garage felt like it could shatter glass, I saw her phone light up. An unknown number. She answered, and though I couldn't hear the voice on the other end, I saw her listen intently. It was the building manager again. I could tell by the flicker of recognition in her eyes before her face changed. It was a masterpiece of acting, a slow dawning horror that seemed to creep across her features. Of course, I know now that the news of a ventilation failure wasn't a surprise to her at all. It was the next act in her play. I heard her scream into the phone, her voice echoing off the concrete. "What do you mean the ventilation is broken? Oh God, the air. They won't have any air to breathe, will they?" She was vocalizing my deepest, most primal fear. After hanging up, she sprinted to Sergeant Davis, her face a perfect mask of absolute terror. "Sergeant, it's a disaster. Management just told me the garage's entire ventilation system has failed. There's no air circulating in Section B. My husband is trapped, and now he's going to run out of air. They're going to suffocate." Her words dropped into the tense silence like a bomb. "What? Ventilation failure?" Sergeant Davis went pale. An enclosed garage with no airflow is a death trap. It wasn't just about stale air anymore. It was about carbon monoxide poisoning. He started shouting orders. "Get the fire department and facilities on the line immediately. I want that system fixed. And call Mount Sinai. Tell them to prepare a hyperbaric chamber and a full heat stroke trauma unit. Now." His orders turned the controlled chaos into a full-blown emergency scene. More sirens, more flashing lights. Firefighters and building engineers swarmed the area, one team attacking the car, another tearing into a wall panel to get to the ventilation controls. And in the midst of it all, I saw two officers lead Amelia away, behind the tape, to give a formal statement. All I remember is the heat. It wasn't just the garage. It was a thick, suffocating wave of panic that stole the air from my lungs. I watched Amelia speak to the policeman, her voice so steady, so measured, while my son was being cooked alive in that metal box. She was going on about some phone app, a timer. Nonsense. It was a cold, practiced performance, and even the officer looked at her sideways, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He knew something was wrong. What kind of wife stands there so placidly? Who discusses remote locking features when her husband can't breathe? It was wrong, all of it. But there was nothing to point to, nothing to prove the cold dread coiling in my gut. I stared at that awful car, praying, while Amelia glanced at her phone. Her phone. The heat radiating from the Porsche felt like a living thing, a monster, and I could feel my boy's time running out. Every second was a lifetime of agony. They were dying in there. I just knew it. Heat stroke. Fever. My mind was racing with horrible images. Then a voice cut through the haze. One of the firefighters, an older man with kind eyes, was shouting. He'd been running his hands over the car, looking, and he'd found something. A glimmer of hope in this suffocating nightmare. It was some kind of manual release for the sunroof, tucked away where no one would ever think to look. an emergency latch. The captain's voice was a lifeline. "I've got it! There's an escape latch," he called out, and for the first time in an hour, I felt like I could take a full breath. A chance. My Alex had a chance. But the hope died as quickly as it came. The car was dead, electrically. To reach the handle on the inside, they had to break through the roof. A massive firefighter, built like a brick house, stepped forward holding a mean-looking axe. "I'll take it," he said, his voice grim. He braced himself, aimed for a corner of the sunroof, and swung with all his might. The sound of that glass cracking was the most horrible and beautiful thing I'd ever heard. It was the sound of a way in. The fireman didn't hesitate, shoving his arm right through the jagged, broken glass. He was feeling around blindly in there, searching for that little lever, while we all stood frozen, watching. "Please, God, please," I prayed, my hands clenched into fists. Then, a faint click, a mechanical sound that echoed in the sudden silence. "It's open!" he yelled, and a collective gasp went through the crowd. He pushed the broken sunroof aside. "Inside! Can you hear me? Fire department!" The car was silent. My heart stopped. Oh God, we were too late. They were gone. But then I saw it. A twitch. Alex. His body shifted in the driver's seat, a small, weak movement that was the most wonderful thing I had ever seen. A second later, a tiny, wretched sound came from the other seat. Chloe. Help. So hot. They were alive. The sound ripped through me and a scream of pure, raw relief tore from my throat. My legs just gave out from under me. I hit the hard concrete floor, my knees screaming, but I couldn't feel it. I just sobbed, relief flooding every part of me. The firefighters were moving quickly now, prying the rest of that sunroof off its frame. "Everybody back!" the captain yelled, clearing a path. "Get ready to receive the patients." He lifted the heavy, shattered panel and threw it aside. The cool air of the garage rushed into that car, and 2 firemen jumped inside. I saw my son, my Alex, slumped forward. His face was a frightening, deep red. His lips were cracked, and he wasn't moving. Chloe looked just as bad, curled into a ball, drenched and shaking, her eyes rolling. It was a scene from a nightmare. "Stretchers now!" a paramedic shouted, pushing forward. They so carefully lifted Alex and Chloe out of that awful car and onto the gurneys waiting beside it. A medic started unbuttoning my son's shirt, and the crowd gasped. His chest was scorched red, blistered, and you could almost feel the heat coming off his skin. "Severe heat stroke. Get him to Mount Sinai now," a doctor ordered. An ambulance, its sirens already wailing, was backing into the garage before he even finished his sentence. They wheeled them past me, 2 separate gurneys. Just as they were about to load Alex in, his eyes fluttered open. They were wild, unfocused, until they found me, and then they moved past me, locking onto Amelia. The look on his face wasn't relief. It was pure, undiluted hatred. A look of betrayal that shook me to my core. He tried to speak, but no sound came out. The paramedics pushed him inside, the doors slammed shut, and the ambulance screamed away into the night. It was over. The immediate danger was over. The police began taping off the parking spot. The nightmare was supposed to be ending. My cousin had to hold me up, guiding me toward a bench. I was shaking so badly I couldn't walk on my own. I had to stay to give a statement. I watched Amelia standing there alone, staring at that broken, ugly car. And then, for just a second, I saw the corner of her mouth turn up in a tiny secret smile. My blood ran cold. I tried to tell myself I imagined it, the stress, the fear, but the image was burned into my mind. An accident. It had to be an accident. She had made a joke of him, of them, in front of everyone. She had let him suffer, let him feel the terror of dying. That look on his face. It wasn't just heat stroke. It was the look of a man who knew he'd been attacked. But that was a monstrous thought. Amelia? Our Amelia? Still, it gnawed at me. This wasn't just a crack in his car. It felt like a crack in our whole world. His reputation, his pride, everything I had helped him build. I watched the police, the doctors, and I felt like I was watching the opening act of some terrible play. Every new person, every question, felt like another piece of a puzzle I couldn't solve. I saw her pull out her phone, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. Then she put it to her ear, and her entire posture changed. She was playing a part. I knew it. I just knew it. Her voice, when she spoke, was choked with tears I knew were fake. "Can you find out what hospital they took Alex to?" she asked his secretary. A performance for everyone's benefit. "Mrs. Hayes, he's at Mount Sinai," the voice on the other end must have said. "He's in surgery. It's critical." "Okay," Amelia said, her voice a perfect imitation of a worried wife. "I'm on my way." She hung up, and for a moment the mask slipped. The smile was gone, but what replaced it was colder than any anger I had ever seen. The waiting room at Mount Sinai smelled of fear and bleach. The fluorescent lights made everyone look sick, their faces pale and drawn. I was living my worst nightmare. My relatives were already there, huddled together, and then she walked in, Amelia, looking calm, untouched. Seeing her so composed after what she'd let happen, something inside me broke. All the terror and helplessness turned into pure, white-hot rage. I flew at her. "You!" I shrieked, my hands reaching for her. "You did this! If my son dies, I'll kill you!" She moved aside so easily, like she was expecting it. My family grabbed me, holding me back. "Margaret, stop it! Calm down!" they pleaded. "Calm down!" I screamed, my whole body shaking as I pointed at her. "She did this to my son. The police said it was that remote thing on the car. Who else would do it?" "It was you!" I raved, the words tumbling out. "You were jealous of him, jealous of that girl." It was the only thing that made sense, a terrible, senseless act of jealousy. In my world, husbands didn't drive their wives to do things like this. It had to be her. It had to be a flaw in her, not in my son. She just stood there. She didn't deny it. She didn't say a single word. She just took it. Her face a perfect mask of sorrow and shock. Her silence was more infuriating than any defense would have been. It made my family pause, their grip loosening as they looked from my frantic face to her quiet grief, and they started to doubt me. We waited. Every minute the light over the operating room door stayed. Red felt like a knife twisting in my heart. It felt like years passed before that door finally swung open and a doctor stepped out, pulling his mask down his tired face. I held my breath. "Doctor, my son, is he—" I couldn't finish the sentence. "The patient is stable," he said, and the world came rushing back into focus. "You got him here just in time. 10 more minutes and we couldn't have saved him. It was a severe heat stroke causing damage to multiple organs. We've stabilized his vitals, but he's still unconscious. We'll have to keep him for observation," he explained. But all I heard was stable. He was alive. "He's out of danger," I whispered, sobbing with a relief so profound it felt like pain. Thank God. Oh, thank God. I felt my knees go weak again, and my cousins had to hold me up. I had my son back. That's all that mattered. Amelia stood in the back, watching, her expression unreadable. I thought then it was shock. Now, looking back, I know it was satisfaction. She hadn't wanted him dead. She wanted him broken. She wanted him to pay for something, for a betrayal so deep that it could drive a person to this. He was alive, but the memory of that day would be a brand on his soul forever. A cousin finally broke the silence. "And what about Chloe?" she asked. For a moment, I had forgotten all about her. He was talking about Chloe, of course. In my mind, even without a wedding band, she was the other woman, the one who had tried to break my son's home. When her name came up, the doctor's face fell. He shook his head. "That young woman's situation is a bit more complex," he said, his voice laced with a strange kind of pity. She also came in with serious heat stroke, he went on, but we discovered traces of hallucinogens in her blood. During the stomach pump, we found small amounts of ketamine and ecstasy. I can't say where she obtained them, but they made her condition significantly worse. There's been some effect on her nervous system. She might have memory loss or trouble thinking clearly when she comes to. We were also required to notify the police narcotics division. That word, narcotics, landed in the middle of our family like a bomb. My son having an affair was a terrible private shame. That girl being on drugs was a public crime. I felt the blood drain from my face. I could only stare at the doors to the operating room, my mouth hanging open, unable to form a single word. The innocent, misguided girl I had pictured was an addict. My son, my sweet boy, had been trapped in that car with an addict. The sterile hallway began to tilt, and I thought I might collapse right there. A wave of horrified whispers spread through my relatives. In a heartbeat, the way they saw everything changed. It was no longer just about sympathy for my son, it was about judgment. Alex wasn't just a victim anymore. He was the fool who got tangled up with a girl from the wrong side of the tracks. The perfect image I'd spent a lifetime polishing was starting to shatter. I glanced over at Amelia, my daughter-in-law, expecting to see her crumbling, but she just stood there, watching the chaos with a stillness that seemed unnatural. At the time, I thought it was shock. Looking back, I see it for what it was. The quiet satisfaction of a general watching her first volley hit its mark. She hadn't counted on the drugs, but oh, how beautifully it served her purpose. Just then, 2 police officers arrived, asking about the drug report. It was a Sergeant Davis. He showed his badge and walked straight to Amelia. "Ma'am, we're going to need a more thorough statement from you." "Of course, Sergeant," she replied, her face a perfect mask of exhausted compliance. He led her into a small private room. I watched them go, my heart pounding. Later, she told us what happened. He made her go over the entire night, asking about every little thing, how she found them, the exact words Alex had used. She recounted her story, the one I so desperately wanted to be true. The worried wife, stumbling upon a nightmare she couldn't comprehend. The sergeant's questions were sharp, she said. "How did you know your husband's car had a remote system?" "He was always showing it off, Sergeant," she'd answered with a sad little smile. "He said all the fancy cars had it. Remote climate control, remote start, a security feature, he called it. I thought he was just being paranoid." It sounded exactly like my Alex. "And his state of mind lately? Anything unusual?" he'd asked. "He's been so buried in work," she sighed, looking down at her hands. "Late nights, always stressed. We haven't been connecting, I know." Her voice trailed off. "I just thought we were going through a difficult time. I never, ever imagined this." "When you received your husband's call," the officer pressed, "why didn't you call 911 right away?" This was the question that could have unraveled everything. Amelia looked up at him, her eyes filling with tears. "Sergeant?" she whispered, her voice cracking just so. "I wasn't thinking. I was just so scared." It's a phone call no mother should ever get. The world went silent, fuzzy around the edges. When I arrived, I saw my daughter-in-law, Amelia, just standing there, hollowed out. My first thought wasn't about the truth. It was about my son, my Alex. What happened to my boy? I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, but my heart was a stone in my chest. A terrible, selfish part of me prayed it was all some misunderstanding, some awful mistake that wasn't his fault, because admitting the alternative, well, that felt like burying our family right then and there, and God forgive me. I watched Amelia talk to the police and felt a wave of relief. She was protecting him. She was playing the part of the dutiful wife, scared and confused, telling them a story that saved my son. I saw her performance for what it was, even then, but I clung to it. I needed to believe it was for love, for the life they had built together. Looking back, I can see the cold calculation in her eyes as she spoke to Sergeant Davis. The perfect story crafted from pain. I chose to see loyalty when I should have seen revenge. In the end, Sergeant Davis closed his notebook. The official report, we later learned, noted erratic behavior due to emotional trauma. Amelia was cleared. "We'll look into the car's system and Miss Miller's drug connections," he told her. "For now, please remain in the city." "I will. Thank you, Sergeant." I watched her walk out of that little room, looking so fragile. I felt a wave of relief that her ordeal with the police was over. I saw a victim, not a victor. I had no idea that she had just secured her alibi in the war she was about to wage. The next phase of her attack began while we were still keeping vigil at the hospital. I found out from a hysterical call from my sister. "It was everywhere," she sobbed. "Online." I logged into a local news forum, and my world ended. My fingers, trembling, began to craft a narrative I could never have imagined. Headline: Partner at top architecture firm in garage. Fire with colleague. Adult toy malfunction suspected. Another one: Porsche architects tryst partner on drugs. Wife's quick, 911. Call saves both. The stories were sordid and detailed, twisting facts into the ugliest possible shapes. The secret life of Alex Vance, architectural prodigy. A gentleman designer by day, a connoisseur of high-risk affairs by night. The posts, spread across dozens of anonymous accounts, painted my son not as a man who made a mistake, but as a willing participant in Chloe's dark world. They had pictures. A grainy photo of Alex and that girl being wheeled out of the hospital. A shot of his beautiful Porsche, its sunroof blown clean off. The combination of keywords was devastatingly effective. Partner, Porsche, sexcapade, drugs. It was designed to go viral. And it did. People devour stories about the mighty falling from grace. They don't care about the truth. They want a villain to hate. Within a day, the story was inescapable. Hashtags like number Vance Porsche Tryst and number architect Alex were trending. The entire city was laughing at my family's ruin. The comments were a fresh kind of hell. "Who is this clown? This is insane." Found him, Alex Vance. Always seemed like such a good guy. His poor wife. A scumbag like that deserves to be canceled. And then one, a comment I skimmed past, then but haunts me now. "You're all fools. I bet the wife did it. She's a queen." I didn't realize it then, but public opinion was a weapon, and Amelia was aiming it with deadly precision. Most people condemned Alex instantly, and slowly, the perception of Amelia began to shift, from the poor, foolish wife to something else entirely, an avenging angel. After giving her statement, she never came back to the hospital. While I was sitting under those fluorescent lights, fielding calls and drowning in shame, she was out there, somewhere in the city, methodically dismantling my son's life, piece by perfect piece. The police investigation would keep Alex grounded. Chloe's drug charges destroyed his credibility, and the online mob was finishing the job. His career, his good name, the life he had built, it was all turning to ash. I began to understand the hell that was waiting for him when he finally woke up. His partners at the firm called an emergency meeting. Clients began to pull out. My husband and I couldn't even think about showing our faces at the club. The scandal wasn't just about Alex anymore. It was a stain on all of us. And our grandson, Ethan, I thought of him hearing the stories one day. Everything I had helped my son build was being systematically burned to the ground. In that awful, quiet waiting room, I remembered a look Amelia had given me, a flash of cold fire in her eyes. I had dismissed it, but now I knew. It was the look of a promise being kept. This was just the beginning, and as I sat there, I had a sickening realization. She wanted me here. She wanted me to have a front row seat for the destruction of my darling boy. She was forcing me to see the man he truly was, not the perfect son I had always pretended he was. I later found out she had called Ethan's preschool that morning, her voice bright and cheerful, and told them she was taking him to the park for the day. At the time, I would have thought it a mother's instinct to shield her child. Now I see it was a queen, moving her most precious piece off the board before the checkmate. 4 days passed in a blur of misery. Then the call came. Alex was awake. The first person he asked for was Amelia. The nurse told me he was not himself, ranting, crying, cursing Amelia's name 1 minute and begging for her the next. I called her, my hands shaking, ready to beg her to come. But her voice was calm, distant, and colder than ice. He's awake? Good. There was a pause. I won't be visiting Margaret. My lawyer will be dropping off the divorce papers tomorrow. And in that moment, it all became clear. The quiet calm, the perfect tears, the online storm. It was all her. And as I hung up the phone, a terrible, shameful thought took root in my soul. My son had earned every bit of this. Looking back, I can see it was all a performance, a perfectly staged play where I was the unwitting accomplice. That first appetizer of her revenge, as she probably saw it. But at the time, all I felt was a mother's blind panic. I hadn't gone to their home. I had raced to the hospital, only to be turned away. My son was hurt, and she was nowhere to be found. When I finally called his school, desperate for any news, a teacher told me Amelia had already picked Ethan up. Her voice had been firm, the teacher said, almost commanding. When I used my key to let myself into their apartment, the silence was chilling. I found them on the floor, surrounded by Legos, as if it were just another lazy afternoon. Ethan was beaming, telling her their block creation was their little house. He looked so happy, so utterly oblivious. And Amelia, she pulled him close, her voice a soft murmur about protecting him, protecting their home. It should have been a touching moment. Instead, a cold dread washed over me. Her words felt less like a comfort and more like a vow, a declaration of war I couldn't yet understand. That's when she saw me standing in the doorway. Of course, I hadn't called first. I was frantic, running on nothing but coffee and fear for days, living out of a hotel just to be near the hospital. The look on my face must have been a mess of fury and exhaustion. "Amelia!" I practically snarled from the entrance hall. She just guided my grandson out of his room, her own face a mask of serene composure. "Margaret, what a surprise. Please, come in. Ethan, you remember Grandma?" My grandson gave a little wave, but my gaze was fixed on her. The nerve of this woman. "Don't you dare," I snapped. "My son is in a hospital bed because of what happened in this house, and you haven't even been to see him once. What is wrong with you?" She didn't even flinch. "You've been misinformed," she said, her voice as smooth and cool as marble. "Alex is in intensive care. The staff has a strict no-visitor policy. My going would be pointless. I thought it best to be here for Ethan, so Alex would have one less thing to be anxious about." I was speechless. For a moment, her logic disarmed me, but my anger came roaring back. "Don't play the saint with me," I accused. "I know exactly what this is. You're using this disaster to tarnish his reputation so you can leave him and take everything he's worked for." Her eyes immediately filled with tears. It was an incredible performance. "How can you even think that?" she whispered, the perfect picture of a wounded wife. "Alex is my whole world. This family is all I have. The only thing I want is for him to recover. Divorce hasn't even entered my mind." It was a lie. I know that now. She never planned to file. She planned to make him beg for it, to leave him with absolutely nothing. "You did good," I told her later, my voice low and urgent. "Make sure your story doesn't change." I stared into her face, looking for any flicker of doubt, any weakness that could bring this all crashing down. But she was a fortress. She just looked like a heartbroken woman trying to hold her world together, and I was a fool. I thought I was protecting my son from a mistake, not from the consequences of his own cruelty. "I mean it," I added, trying to sound threatening. How pathetic that sounds to me now. The fight went out of me then, replaced by a cold terror. "My son is lucky he's not dead," I whispered, the threat empty. "If he was, I don't know what I'd do to you." She didn't flinch, just handed me a glass of water. "Margaret, what really happened?" I begged. She looked me dead in the eye and said it was an accident. Then she said the words that started all this unraveling in my mind. "We all need to think about the part we played in this." At the time, I thought she meant our part in the lie. I realize now she was talking about me, about my part in raising him. "Were we not paying enough attention to the pressure he was under?" she asked, her tone dripping with false concern. It was a brilliant move, a subtle accusation aimed right at me. "You spent all your time criticizing me and making demands of him. Did you ever stop to ask if he was okay?" That's what she was really saying. I felt my defenses rise instantly. I slammed the glass onto the coffee table. "Neglectful? We gave that boy the world. If he hadn't married someone like you—" She held up a hand. "Let's not do this, Margaret. What's done is done. We need to focus on Alex's recovery. His reputation and the company's are being destroyed online," she continued, her voice all business now. "This is our most urgent problem." The mention of his business got my full attention. I didn't understand the internet, but I understood scandal. "What can we do? The police are involved, and that awful woman." "The police suspect she has a drug problem," Amelia said gravely. "If that becomes the story, our family name is ruined forever." "Exactly," I agreed, horrified. "Which is why we have to get out in front of this," she said, moving to sit beside me, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We have to write the story ourselves." I was listening now, completely hooked by her sudden command of the situation. "How?" I asked. "First," she said, holding up one finger, "we present a united front. To the police, to the press, to everyone. It was a tragic accident caused by a malfunctioning remote control car. Period. As for Chloe Miller," she went on, "her personal issues are her own. The company's PR team needs to issue a formal statement immediately. They must state that Alex had no knowledge of her private struggles and that her actions have nothing to do with the business. We position Alex as a victim in all of this." Every word was a chess move I couldn't see. She was building a fortress around him, but she was also walling him in, cutting him off from that woman and turning the story into something simple, a faulty product and a troubled employee. "So, we just blame the girl in the car?" I asked, needing to hear it plainly. "Essentially, yes," she nodded. "Second, we steer the conversation," she said, pulling out her phone. She showed me comments I couldn't quite read. "Look, Margaret, people are already on our side. They feel for us. We hire professionals, people who manage these things, to amplify that message. The betrayed wife stands by her man, a good man taken in by a predator. We create so much noise that no one can find the real story anymore," she explained. "All they'll know is the version we want them to." I stared at the phone screen, the mix of words and pictures a confusing blur. I didn't understand how it worked, but I understood the power of a good lie. A single practical thought surfaced through my fog of fear. "That sounds expensive," I said. "It's a necessary cost," she replied smoothly. "We can use our joint savings account. This is an emergency, Margaret. We have to do whatever it takes." That's what convinced me, her willingness to spend their money. It made her seem like one of us, a wife making a sacrifice for the family's honor. I see now she wasn't just sold, she was the one selling, and I bought every word. I didn't see her endgame, but I knew her plan was the only thing that might save my son from utter ruin. "All right, Amelia," I finally agreed. "We'll do it your way. I'll call his office." She helped me up from the sofa, a gentle hand on my arm. "Thank you, Margaret. You look like you're about to collapse. Go get some rest. I can handle this." The moment I walked out that door, I was no longer a mother trying to save her son. I was a pawn in her game. Looking back, I can picture her smile dropping the second I was gone. I see her turning my love for my son against me, twisting it into a weapon. I thought I was part of a rescue mission, but I was just following her script, helping her dig the very hole she was pushing Alex into. I was never her partner in this. I was just a convenient, disposable tool she could use to create the chaos she needed. In the days that followed, the company released the statement, just as she'd outlined. It was a masterpiece of corporate deflection, expressing sympathy while admitting no fault. And I did my part. I called old friends in the press, family connections, anyone who would listen. I repeated the story Amelia and I had rehearsed, shaping the narrative, poisoning the well, all in the name of protecting my son. Before long, a different story started bubbling up online. "Mr. Vance is a victim too," one headline read. Another said, "Addict manipulates prominent businessman. Wife stands by him with grace." Public sympathy, once a tidal wave against us, began to split into 100 confusing streams. The truth didn't just get buried, it was suffocated under an avalanche of our money and her perfectly crafted lies. This was the chaos she wanted. Alex was trapped, forced to deal with the police, his angry investors, the media, and a family that was lying for him. He was being pulled in a dozen different directions, drowning in the fallout. And she was the one who had choreographed the entire disaster, watching from the sidelines as her twisted play reached its crescendo. A few nights later, Alex's secretary called me, her voice trembling. "Mrs. Vance, he's asking for Amelia. He's not doing well. He's refusing his medication until he can talk to her." I immediately called Amelia, begging her to go. I'll never forget the coldness in her voice. "Tell him I'll be happy to visit," she said, "as soon as he's transferred out of the ICU and is in a more stable condition." "But Amelia," I pleaded, "the doctors say he needs to be calm, and you're all he's asking for." There was a pause. "Then they should sedate him," she replied flatly. "He is an adult," she continued, her voice devoid of any emotion, "and he needs to learn that actions have consequences. He needs to rest, not throw a temper tantrum." And then she hung up on me. Her refusal was the cruelest cut of all. He was reaching for her, and she pulled her hand away, letting him fall. The Amelia he thought he knew, the one we all thought we knew, was gone. In her place was this stranger, this creature of pure ice, whose only purpose seemed to be my son's destruction. I felt a profound chill, a mother's intuition screaming that I had made a terrible, terrible mistake. I imagine him sending her a furious text, full of threats and disbelief, and I can just as easily imagine her laughing as she typed back some cold, final reply. That night, when I looked at my grandson, sleeping peacefully in the bed I'd made for him at my hotel, all I could think was, "What have I done?" The night feels darkest just before dawn, they say, but for us, the dawn never came. When my son was finally released from the hospital, I was the one who called her to share the news. He was out in less than 10 days, sent home to our family's penthouse to recuperate. It was a polite term for what was really happening. After the public relations mess and the nosedive the company's stock took, his partners wanted him gone. A man with such a sordid private life, with even a whisper of a connection to a drug investigation, was poison. His recuperation was a quiet, dignified execution of his career. All my son could do was sit in that magnificent apartment, looking out over a city he used to own, and slowly realize his entire world had been dismantled, and I had handed his wife the tools to do it. When Amelia came home the day after Alex did, she had a look on her face I'd never seen before, a terrible, quiet calm. I was in the kitchen, my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold a coffee mug. I'd been picturing her at some high-end law firm, maybe, but she told me she'd gone straight to his office, right into the lion's den. She explained how she'd asked for the head of legal and the head of public relations. She used a voice, she said, that left no room for argument. I could just picture it. I'd seen her command a room at charity galas. I felt a surge of pride, thinking she was there to fight for my son, to defend our family. Oh, what a fool I was. She recounted how the two executives, a Mr. Davis and a Miss Miller, came down to meet her. They were all careful words and practiced sympathy, she said. I imagined they saw a heartbroken wife, someone to be managed. They offered assurances that the company was handling Alex's situation. with the utmost seriousness. But Amelia cut right through it. "I'm not here to point fingers," she told them, and when she repeated the words to me, a little chill ran down my spine. "I'm here to discuss a plan." A plan. Even then, in my ignorance, the word sounded less like a negotiation and more like a verdict. She told me how she laid it out for them, that Alex had built that company, that his personal life shouldn't cost him his legacy. My heart swelled. Yes, I thought, that's my girl. She's standing up for him. I believed every word because I wanted to. I needed to believe that the perfect life I'd watched my son build wasn't just a house of cards. Of course, the executives pushed back. Mr. Davis talked about brand damage and the partnership agreement. He insisted it was just business. They thought they were talking to a wife. They had no idea they were facing an executioner. And I, listening to the story, still thought she was an angel of mercy. Then she told me about the document she pulled from her purse. A letter of intent, she'd called it. She proposed that Alex sign over 30% of his shares to the other partners. For a price well below market value, she added, her voice perfectly even. Even then, a part of my mind recoiled. Why would she suggest such a thing? In exchange, she demanded the company clear his name and give him a large settlement, plus an honorary director title for life. To my naive ears, it sounded like a brilliant, if painful, solution, a way to salvage his dignity. She had spent 3 days with lawyers, she said. I saw a devoted wife. I didn't see the trap being set. It was only later, as the days turned to weeks, that I understood the cruelty of her plan. That 30% stake was Alex's entire world. Without it, he was nobody there. The low price she'd suggested wasn't a compromise. It was a fire sale designed to gut his fortune. The settlement was a pittance, a bandage on a mortal wound. And that title, honorary director, was the most vicious part. It wasn't a lifeline. It was a public leash, forcing him to watch from the sidelines as his empire moved on without him, paid for with the scraps he was thrown. She told me how shocked they were, Mr. Davis and Miss Miller. They had expected tears, not corporate warfare. They called her proposal harsh. I can only imagine. They were looking at a woman they thought they knew and seeing a complete stranger, someone far more ruthless than they were. Is his health even up to it anymore? She'd asked them, her voice dripping with false concern. His brand is bankrupt. As she recounted this to me, my blood ran cold. She was using his collapse, the very thing I was losing sleep over, as a bargaining chip. She was selling him off piece by piece. He's a ticking time bomb, she'd warned them. Isn't it better to cut the cord now? Every word was a calculated blow, not just to the company, but to the man she had promised to love. And I was just beginning to realize this wasn't about saving him. It was about burying him. The final threat was the dagger to the heart. She brought up Chloe, the investigation. She hinted that more secrets could come out, things that could damage the company even further. She was threatening to burn everything to the ground, and she was using my son's life as the kindling. I saw it then. The fear she must have put in their eyes. They weren't dealing with Alex's wife anymore. They were dealing with his judge and jury, and I, his mother, had been cheering her on from the sidelines, completely blind to the truth of what she was doing. The shame of it still burns. They finally agreed, of course. How could they not? She gave a little, letting him keep 15% of his shares, a gesture that looked like mercy, but was just a way to twist the knife. He got the title, the money, and a life sentence of irrelevance. She told me all this, and then she fell silent. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw the victory in her eyes. She hadn't just won a negotiation. She had surgically removed my son from his own life, leaving him with nothing but concrete and glass and an emptiness I couldn't fathom. I remember standing in my kitchen, a dish towel twisted in my hands, trying to find the right words. "Amelia, you're back," I'd said, my voice barely a whisper. I was trying to smile, trying to show relief, but all I felt was a rising tide of dread. "It's handled," she said, so calm. When she explained the basics of the agreement, I couldn't hide my worry. "But his shares," I stammered, "and the money, Alex won't like that." I was still thinking about his pride, his ego. I hadn't yet grasped the totality of his ruin. "Don't you worry, Margaret," she said, patting my shoulder. The gesture felt condescending. "Health is what's important. We have to support him." Her words were perfect, a flawless portrait of a loving wife, and in my weakness and my fear, I clung to them. My eyes welled up with tears of confusion and relief. "You are so wise," I told her, grabbing her hand. I felt like a drowning woman thanking the person who was holding my head under the water. "Whatever you think is best," I promised, and I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Contempt. I was just another piece she had moved on the board. In the weeks that followed, I watched her play her part. She visited Alex every day, but I knew the comfort she brought was poison. It was a daily reminder of all he had lost, of how she had outmaneuvered him. She gave a television interview, a masterpiece of grief and strength. The world fell in love with her. They called her a role model, a woman of grace and power. My daughter-in-law, the corporate destroyer, was becoming a feminist icon on the back of my son's broken spirit. The irony was so thick I felt I could choke on it. And Alex. My boy became a ghost, a cautionary tale. His pain was framed as a necessary penance, and Amelia was the gracious saint forgiving him. It was the most elaborate, cruel, and public revenge I could ever have imagined. I saw him wither. The drinking, the endless nights he'd call me, not saying anything, just breathing into the phone. All that fire in him, his ambition, his charm. She was methodically turning it all to ash. I finally understood that she wasn't just angry. She was repaying a debt, and the price was his soul. He was once a magnificent eagle, I used to tell my friends. But Amelia had plucked every feather, leaving him shivering and earthbound. The last time I saw him before he went into treatment, he was just a hollow shape on a sofa. But when he saw me, his eyes focused for a moment, and they were filled with a terrible poison meant for her. He told me about her visits, how she'd bring him soup and talk to him in that soft, gentle voice. "The doctor says you need your nutrition," she'd say, as if she were a nurse and not the cause of his illness. He said he would just stare at her, hating her with what little energy he had left. "You must be loving this," he'd finally managed to say to her one day, and she, with that perfect smile, would deny it. "I'm doing this for us, Alex, because I love you, for our son, Ethan." She used their child, my grandson, as the final shield for her cruelty. Alex had told me he'd just started laughing, a horrible, broken sound. "You love me?" he'd repeated, the words tearing from his throat. "You call this love?" He called her the most vicious woman on the planet. And looking back, knowing what I know now about what he did to her, my deepest shame is this. I think he was wrong. She was simply the most justified. The first time I knew it was truly over was when Alex called me, his voice a raw whisper. He told me Amelia had just been there, placing a folder on their coffee table as if it were a magazine. When he saw the words, "divorce settlement," he said the air left his lungs. He'd asked her, his voice cracking, if she really meant it. She'd looked right through him and said yes, that there was nothing left. He rambled on, telling me the terms she'd offered, and my blood ran cold. She was being so generous, he'd said. The house, the car, everything but their boy, Ethan. It sounded like an act of mercy, but I knew my daughter-in-law. It wasn't mercy, it was a surgeon's cut. Precise and devastating, designed to leave him with an empty shell of a life. A mother knows her son. And I knew that to Alex, this wasn't just a divorce. It was a public declaration of his failure. What good is a beautiful house when the laughter is gone? What good is a fast car when you have nowhere to go? She was offering him gilded cage, and the part about splitting assets was the cruelest joke. I heard the story of how he'd swept the papers to the floor, roaring that he'd never sign them. He told me how calm she was simply picking them up. and then she delivered the final blow, quietly telling him he didn't have much time to think it over. My boy, my confident Alex, sounded like a terrified child on that phone call. He didn't tell me then about her threat, about his girlfriend, that girl, Chloe, and her upcoming trial. I learned that part later from the evening news, and the shame was so heavy I could barely breathe. The thought that Amelia knew, that she'd warned him he could be implicated for drug use in his own home. It was the first crack in my denial. In those early days, I saw Amelia as a monster, tearing down the world my son had built. I didn't understand then that Alex had handed her the matches and gasoline himself. She was just burning away the lies, starting with their joke of a marriage. She was leaving him a ghost, and I, his own mother, was powerless to stop it. The trial for Chloe Miller felt like a public crucifixion for my family. As I watched the news, I prayed my son's name wouldn't come up. But it did. The girl got a suspended sentence, just 2 years, for cooperating. She was free to go. My son was not. A reporter wouldn't leave the poor girl alone, asking about Alex. And then she said it. A quiet little admission that he seemed to be on some kind of stimulant that night. It was a small sentence, but it was enough to destroy what was left of his reputation and my heart. The world turned on him overnight. The internet was a cesspool of judgment. Suddenly, Alex wasn't the victim of an affair. He was a drug user, a cheater, a degenerate. They called Amelia a saint for putting up with him. I had to turn off my computer, the words blurring through my tears. Every headline was a fresh wound. Our family name, dragged through the mud. That perfect image he had built, the one I had been so proud of, was shattered into a million pieces. He was no longer a respected architect. He was a scandal. The consequences were swift. His firm, the company he poured his life into, saw its stock plummet. Projects were canceled. Friends of mine, whose husbands were on the board, stopped returning my calls. Layoffs followed, and the company was gutted just to stay afloat. Alex's 15% stake became worthless. Worse, the contracts he'd signed meant he was now drowning in personal debt. In just 3 days, his entire world had been wiped out. And then Amelia, I heard later, went back to see him one last time with the signed papers. I went to the penthouse the next day using the key Amelia had given me months before, back when I was still a welcome part of their lives. The place was a tomb. Thick curtains blocked out the sun, and the stale air was suffocating. I found him curled up on the sofa, a shadow of the man he once was. The whole apartment stank of cheap whiskey and cigarettes. He was so thin, his face gaunt, with new streaks of gray in his hair that hadn't been there a week ago. When he slowly looked up, I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes, thinking I was her. When he saw it was only me, the light went out completely. "What do you want?" he rasped, his voice raw. I saw the finalized divorce papers on the table, and my heart ached. I tried to help him up, but his legs gave out and he just crumpled to the floor. I knelt beside him, holding my boy as he sobbed. I just held him while he fell apart, right there on the expensive rug. He told me she'd just stood there, watching him fall. He said she told him he was free. He started laughing then, a horrible, broken sound that I will never forget. "Free?" he'd choked out. He repeated her words to me, his voice trembling with a rage that had no fight left in it. "I have nothing," he wept. "My company, my money, my home. Amelia, are you happy now?" He told me she'd coolly replied it wasn't about happiness, but about getting back what was hers. 7 years of her life. He whispered what she said next, the words that finally made me understand. She said he'd treated her like a fool and then asked him a simple question. "Did you ever deserve what I gave you?" He told me he couldn't answer. He had no answer. And in that moment, neither did I. She told him she had wanted to destroy him from the moment she saw him with that other woman, that she wanted him to fall from the highest peak into the deepest pit. I listened to my son recount her words, and a terrible, chilling thought settled in my heart. She was right, and I did it. He said she spoke the words so clearly, so coldly. "You lost, Alex. You were a piece on my board." He'd finally snapped then, calling her a demon. He confessed that he'd tried to lunge at her, to grab her, but he was too weak. He just collapsed, a heap on the floor. He said she just straightened her jacket, completely unfazed by the wreck of a man at her feet. A cold smile, he'd said. That's what hurt the most. The cold smile as she told him the game was over. "Remember tonight," she had said. "This is my last gift to you." It was a gift of absolute ruin, delivered by Amelia Hayes, the woman I once called my daughter. After she left his life for good, the silence in that penthouse was deafening. He told me he heard her shut the door on his sobs and his curses. For her, it was a new day, a deep breath of fresh air. For my son, it was the end of everything. I tried to arrange visits with Ethan, but it was all handled through lawyers. I saw a picture once of her picking him up from preschool. He was running to her, his arms wide open. She was kneeling to hug him, and I knew in my soul that she was doing the right thing for her child. Her tears, I imagine, were not for the husband she'd lost, but for the freedom she had won. When she told her little boy she was happy, I believe she was. It was just the two of them now, against the world. I couldn't even be angry anymore, just filled with a deep, aching sorrow. The greatest lesson my son taught her was that a woman's security comes from herself. I heard she used the settlement money in her savings to open her own design firm. A woman's real strength isn't a man, it's her own spirit. And Amelia's spirit was unbreakable. Her company became a success. She moved out of that glass tower in the sky and found a real home for her and Ethan, a place with a yard and trees. I used to drive by sometimes just to see the lights on. I called her once. I pleaded with her for Ethan's sake to help my son. Her voice was polite but firm. She told me the money she'd arranged for me was the last tie she would have to our family. My connection to her and to my grandson was severed. It was the price for my son's sins. I never knew what became of Alex. The rumors were that he sold everything to pay his debts and moved to some quiet town down south. Maybe he's trying to rebuild. I pray that he is. But some nights, I sit in the dark and remember the bright, beautiful boy I raised, and I wonder how it all went so wrong. Maybe what happened was the only mercy he could have hoped for. A year later, I saw her from a distance, picking Ethan up from school. She looked settled, powerful. I later saw a drawing Ethan had done that won an award. It was of him and his mom, safe and smiling under a huge protective tree that stood where a father should have been. My heart ached for all three of them. My son told me he tried calling her once, long after. His number was blocked. He was a ghost from a past life she had buried for good. Their orbits were never meant to cross again. She had her victory, a clean story of a woman who fought back against the man who betrayed her and built a better world for herself. But I have to wonder about the nights. When Ethan is asleep and the house is quiet, does she ever feel that victory is a hollow thing? My own guilt comes in those quiet hours. I defended my son's lies with such fury. I enabled him. I was so wrapped up in the fantasy of my perfect son that I couldn't see the man he'd actually become. She crafted a brutal, elaborate revenge. But we were the ones who handed her the tools. My son's betrayal and my own willful blindness were the fuel for her fire. Her hands are legally clean, but I know a part of her must feel the stain of it. A triumph that savage has to leave an echo, a ringing silence where a life used to be. She dismantled my son's world, but I have to believe she tore a piece of her own soul away to do it. You cannot inflict that kind of pain without being changed by it forever. She won, but I pray she didn't lose the best parts of herself in that awful war. I used to believe in simple things, like good and evil. He was my good boy, and she was the wicked woman who trapped him. Looking back, I see how foolish I was. He made a selfish choice, and she made a vengeful one, and I just stood by and clapped for the wrong reasons. We all chose our own disasters, and now we must live inside of them. If I could speak to her now, I'd want to ask her, If you could go back to that moment, hearing what you heard, would you do it again? I'm afraid of the answer, because the Amelia I knew, the sweet girl who married my son, she died that night. The woman who walked out of that garage was someone new, someone forged in a fire of her own making. When I see her photograph in magazines now, her smile isn't one of victory. It's a quiet calm, a stillness that comes only after you've survived a hurricane. I spent so long casting her as the villain, but I see it clearly now. She wasn't the monster. She was the reckoning. I know she has her own scars to carry, but she's walking toward a new dawn and she's smiling. It isn't the smile of someone who got revenge. It's the smile of someone who survived and who learned, through all that pain, to love the life she has left. And for that, I can only feel the profound sense of respect.